Thank you very much, Professor Davies. I'm sorry that before you talked, I didn't mention your illustrious background. Professor Davies is co-director of Partners in Conflict and Partners in Peace Building here at the University of Maryland. He's a professor lecturer at SAIS in downtown Washington, and he's partnered in peace-building initiatives in over 30 countries and has trained thousands of government, United Nations, international organizations, and other professionals in conflict transformation, prevention, and peace building, and has served as a consultant to U.S. government, several different agencies relating to state failure and political instability for State Defense, U.S. Institute of Peace, National Defense University, and others. He has published a number of works in this area, the most recent being an article on Partners in Peace Building in Lesotho in a book on building peace, practical reflections from the field. As we continue the program, we thought we would have 5 minutes or so of questions relating to Dr. Davies' talk, and then we'll proceed to Mr. Kovacs, who will discuss the problem of defamation of religions and freedom solution. So if any of you have questions for Dr. Kovacs, we'd be very happy to entertain them. Please walk up to the center of the room and address the microphone there.
Okay. Dr. Davies, you said, if I understood right, the most peaceful countries were the diverse ones with different people from different cultures, different countries. And I think the United States has embraced that, sorry, my English. But in Europe, I think that is still a problem where the citizens, I guess not the governments, but the citizens have not embraced that and still don't feel good about people from different countries, different cultures living amongst them. I want to know why you think that that's happening in those countries, in the European countries and not in the US.
Yeah. The most unstable configuration is where you have a single group that has somewhere between about 30% and 85% of the population. So big enough to think it should dominate and be able to control how the society functions, but not so big that it may not be nervous about challenges or through the impact of minority groups coming in. So this is the way to stabilize such countries is to be able to continue to increase the level of diversity and to be able to encourage those countries to embrace diversity so that the minorities can grow as it is in this country right now. But we still are in that range, a dangerous range, of having between 30% and 85% a majority. And so we can see in this country as well as in Europe this pattern of dominant majority that feels in some cases threatened by the challenges, cultural challenges amongst others, from different minority groups. We also see that part of the reason why conflict has become less deadly over the last 18 years is that we've become much better at being able to get people out of the line of fire. That the number of refugees and displaced people has enormously escalated over this time and remains high. And so you've got a chronically high refugee population that we're having a lot of trouble being able to resettle. And so you've got some real tension about that issue in a number of countries that also contributes to the situation. So this is an abnormal current situation where you've got this overload of refugees. It's a good thing that we've got the refugees because at least they're not being forced to stay where they are and become statistics in the number of civilians being killed in war zones. But nevertheless, it's a problem that hasn't yet been solved.
Thank you. I know our Congress is not the most popular institution now, but when you as scholars gonna start thinking the findings of the Congress, that the war in Iraq was not war in terror, was invasion, unjust for a country who have no terror, and since the invasion there were so many people lost their lives. And I know you depend on statistics, you show slides with the statistics, and I don't know if your sources is academic or institutions such as University of Maryland or Michigan, or you depend on trade polls like Gallup's. Thank you.
This is a broad-based, collaborative academic research program, and we take the data from everywhere we can get it. There are thousands of variables, and you know, all the main sources that are available around the world we focus on. We also have a growing program on counterterrorism now on campus that our center is a part of, that also taps the data as broadly as possible. But I agree with you, clearly the premises for the invasion of Iraq were based on a poor understanding, let's say, of the situation, a misunderstanding of the situation, and the different the justifications that have been advanced since then have been deeply flawed. The idea that we can somehow bring democracy to Iraq through war is deeply flawed. That the number of democracies that have emerged through war I can count on the fingers of one hand. This is an extremely rare occurrence. Democracies emerge through the hard, non-violent, sustained efforts of large populations over time. They don't emerge from war. In almost every case, war leaves a country less democratic, less free than it started. And the exceptions are very rare, and there are good reasons for those exceptions. One of the rare exceptions, for example, is South Africa after apartheid. And this was, you know, where we had an extraordinary leader and extraordinary support internationally for a sustained program that brought together people at the local level in peace committees to be able to sit together, black and white and Asian, and be able to figure out what is it that the new regime should look like for us to be able to sit together. Do we want to simply have blacks replace whites as the dominant group, or do we want something better than that? People opted for something better. It was this nonviolent campaign that really undergirds the modest strength of South African democracy. But of about 60 current democracies that have emerged since World War II, only I think 4 of them emerged following war, including South Africa. The other 3 have been in Central America with massive support from the US to be able to protect what in each case are quite weak democracies and fragile democracies. War is not the way to transition to democracy. And so again, this premise is just flawed, nor is it going to work in Afghanistan. We have to rethink why we're there and how we can proceed. We have to start talking with people. How can we help you? What is it that you need? How can we help you? That's barely begun.
Professor Davies, you identified as one requirement for the continuation of violent conflict the source of funding, and you also identified the illegal drug trade as a source of funding. I wonder if you have an opinion about the extent to which we could eliminate that source by convincing rich countries to legalize what are now trade and what's now illegal drugs that might cause a collapse in price and a collapse in that source of funding.
I think it's not only a good idea, but it's going to be essential to be able to continue the drop in violence worldwide. There's entrenched, very large black economies, by which I mean informal, illegal economies out there now that are primarily fed by drugs. And we don't have to legalize drugs, we just have to decriminalize them. Criminalizing behavior is not the way to solve social problems. Drugs is a social problem and a health problem. Criminalizing behavior it simply pushes it underground rather than solves it. So we have to be able to follow the lead that we're seeing in some European countries, and increasingly we're seeing some states in the US moving in the same direction of decriminalizing different sorts of drugs until we can change the situation. You know, I just came back from Northeast India, and to see the situation there, it's just sad. The situation is isolated. It's not supported for systematic legal development by the government of India because it wants to ignore it, keep it under wraps, and so it's just a playground for drugs flowing in through Burma primarily, and a distribution point for the world. And you've got the rebel movements there that started out with high ideals have simply become drug gangs, criminal gangs fighting each other for turf. Because there's just too much money involved. And this, from that point, it's not only about drugs. We need to pay very careful attention to the amount of money that flows through our own political system that influences our policies disproportionately. It was President Eisenhower that first warned against the influence of the military-industrial complex. Huge money in the business of war that can unduly influence our political choices. We have to be careful not only in terms of how money influences potential challenges, but how money influences governments.
Well, we've had 4 very interesting presentations this morning, in addition, of course, to the first talk by Dr. Soltes from Georgetown. And this seems to be a common theme between these, the salience of identity and the need through identity to establish an area in which one is comfortable. And as our first speaker emphasized, it starts with the very beginning of life and the correlation of infant mortality to cultures that engage in wars or where war is likely. In finding identity, people are in search of security, justice, and values that allow them to become tolerant toward other people. And human rights as individual rights, which one of our speakers emphasized, is the emphasis in the United States, and through a resolution passed between the US and Egypt in the Organization of Islamic Conference, the human rights as individual rights allows an atmosphere of tolerance in which education for all can prosper. And finally, as our last speaker emphasized, education is important not only in identity, but continuing beyond just school learning in order to educate us all in our own way as peacemakers. We'll now have a few minutes of questions. Those of you who wish to ask questions may address them to any of the individual speakers. And when you do have questions, please come up to the microphone in the center of the room.
Hi. I have more of a general comment to all the speakers in a way, especially the ones who mentioned tolerance. Well, I myself use the word tolerance in a different meaning, I guess, because normally when you say tolerance, it's like, I hate you, but I tolerate you. I just, I can't do anything about it, so I just tolerate you. But I guess the meaning we have been using it is more like, you are different than me, and that's okay. We can live together. It's fine. I don't hate you. You are different. I am different. And that's it. There is no like hate or love or anything in there. It's just recognizing the differences and being fine with it, because you know that there will be people with different perspectives, different cultures, and in a way you appreciate it, the differences, because unlike some other people who think that everybody should be equal, everybody should think the way I think, you recognize the differences. So if the speakers have any comments on that, I would like to hear.
I'd love to comment on that, because I come across this all the time. It's a concern to me that people of goodwill actually seem to be wanting to give tolerance a bad name. I think that going beyond tolerance is great. Being able to accept others, being able even to embrace the differences is a wonderful thing. But I don't want to diminish the importance of tolerance. I've heard it criticized by saying, tolerance, isn't that what I do to a sore thumb? I have to tolerate it. Well, sometimes we have differences that we don't accept. I love my Christian brothers and sisters, but I do not accept the incarnation of God. I don't accept it. I think it's wrong. I think they're wrong. And I'll tell them I think they're wrong, and I'll discuss it with them politely and respectfully, but I'm not going to accept it. Therefore, that I should tolerate it becomes really important. And I think that what happens is when we set the bar too high and we say, we have to accept our differences, we have to embrace our differences, we have to be joyful in our differences, that I think what happens is that we essentially are taking a group of people who would have been tolerant and we're telling them, don't join the club of the tolerant people. And now we're becoming exclusivist. We're saying to those people, you know, we don't want you because you're not willing to embrace and accept the differences. And therefore we are hurting ourselves and setting ourselves back. Yes, when people know each other well, they will accept one another and they even will embrace one another, but not always. And it's very important that we insist that even when I cannot respect your views, that I still respect your right to those views. They're two different points, and they're both important. And I think that the respect of someone's right to disagree with me is more important, because that's the one that's going to be given the tougher test. If you and I disagree on some minor point, and I say, that's okay, I don't, you think coffee should be black, and I think you should have milk in it, well, okay, I love you anyway. That's just not that as important as when we disagree on something that really may hurt us to know that I see a truth and you don't see it. I still have to tolerate you, meaning I still have to respect your right to hold your view.
Are there any other questions?
I had a question for Ambassador Newton, but others may want to comment. In this discussion of media and communications, I was wondering if you have something, some specific evaluation you could offer of the Gulen Movement's use of media.
I can't say that I'm really terribly knowledgeable on that subject. I mean, maybe there's someone else who could discuss it better than others, but I mean, the whole movement is tolerant. It works with other religions, it works in other cultures. And I mean, I've read Zaman. Zaman comes in an English edition because I don't read Turkish, but it certainly is a very fine newspaper. I've read a number of the editorials in Zaman, for example, and it seems to me they're always taking moderate, reasonable positions. I've never seen anything intolerant connected with any of the media I've seen in the Gulen movement, but I'm certainly not an expert on that aspect. Anyone else would care to comment?
Yes, I did have a question for Dr. Ahmad. You commented in passing that you decided some years ago to give up your work in astronomy to move into social sciences, and I wonder if you could give us some details. How did that happen? Were you dissatisfied at a certain point with sort of the attitudes or positions of scientists in this country?
Oh no, not at all. I mean, I miss not doing the hard science anymore. It was that I felt that that there was more of a need for my services in the social sciences. I realized at that time, I think there were 2,000 members of the American Astronomical Society, every one of them competent in doing the kind of work that I was doing. And I thought, whereas the people who were doing the Iranian Revolution demonstrated that the people who were the experts in Islam didn't know what they were doing. They didn't see it coming, number one. Number two, after it happened, their explanations for it made no sense at all. They were totally incoherent. And so, having been interested as an avocation in politics and economics all my life, and in Islam as a practicing Muslim very seriously, I thought that it would be better use of my time and more benefit to society if I were to change fields. I made the transition by writing a book called Signs in the Heavens, which was about the history of science and about, in particular, the role that Islamic civilization played in the development of modern science, something that is known to historians but not to the general public. And when I published the book, I realized that a lot of the details weren't known to the historians of science. Some of the historians of science were quite surprised by some of the facts that I uncovered. So that book was successful. It led to my being invited to give the honors courses here at the University of Maryland, and in 1993 I formed the Minaret of Freedom Institute, an Islamic free market libertarian think tank that has gained a measure of recognition. And just last year we published, in collaboration with 2 other Muslim organizations, we published a directory of experts on Islam and Muslim affairs, listing 65 experts, in which we make available to academics, media, and to government and policymakers, so that they can have easy access to people who actually know about Islam, as opposed to the ones who say they know something about it.
I would like to ask another question about media in regards to freedom of speech, Peter, and then tying it also into Ambassador Newton's talking about the importance of media and how it is portrayed and to create a positive reaction and facilitate a more peaceful coexistence. If you could speak, Peter, on particularly the cartoons, the Danish cartoon crisis, and the definition of freedom of speech, and then, but also the freedom of reaction. People are being able to voice disappointment in that, and how, unfortunately, that was put into a frame of anti-freedom of speech, whereas no, one has the freedom to, maybe not violently, but one shouldn't, but to speak against that and speak out against that. Could you speak to that?
Yeah. Interestingly enough, I found myself, when the controversy broke, I think around January of '06, in Islamabad. And as the counselor of the Embassy for Public Affairs. And I still point to this day to President Bush's first reaction. I mean, we are, in the Pakistanis' mind's eye, we're the hidden hand, we're the source of everything that goes wrong in that country, and yet we got a pass on that crisis in the country where the reaction to the cartoons was most virulent in the world. Why? Because President Bush, in his wisdom, said, look, we absolutely deplore hateful speech directed against the world's great faith traditions. I'm terrible at paraphrasing, and I don't remember punchlines and jokes, so forgive me. But we stand up for the freedom of people to express themselves. So it was both, and the Pakistani editorialists, most of whom I knew quite well, were very taken with this statement. We kind of got a pass. I mean, there wasn't much comment on it, but we didn't become, as we usually do, the whipping boy. I point to that. I also think that we lost, and if I can expound a little bit, kind of a teaching moment both ways. One of the things I quickly did is I asked my librarian in the embassy, because we had a reference service, to dig out of the last 5 years, do a search of the last 5 years of the New Yorker magazine, and come out with every cartoon that had a kind of a religious import. And I put a book together, nice, like a grade school kid, nice colored paper, and I bound it. And I carried it around and I showed it to sophisticated contacts who I knew would appreciate the point I was making. And it had things like Jesus and Judas sitting at a bar, obviously inebriated and singing, because the Gospel of Judas had just more or less exonerated him from the traditional view of him as the engineer of the crucifixion and so forth. That we in the West, we are not, the point was we weren't picking on Islam, that this is a vein of humor that, while may not be appreciated cross-culturally, is very much in keeping. And then the other thing that I pointed out, and I wasn't in a good position to do anything about it, was that I don't think many non-Muslims appreciate how strong the iconoclasm in Islam is, and that was the other half of the teaching moment. So there's my comment.
Can I make a comment?
Yes, please do.
There's a nuance that sometimes gets missed in this discussion. It's very easy to find examples like that in the American media, because in the United States we have total freedom of speech and of the press. And in these other countries where these things are being published, they don't. And that's why the feeling is that Muslims are being picked on. In the United States, you can publish a Holocaust denial if you want to. You won't go to jail, and you probably won't even get too severely attacked, though people may, say the guy's an idiot in passing. Whereas you will go to jail. There are major scholars who are actually facing jail time just for saying that the number of people killed in the Holocaust was less than was originally reported. Those are things you can't do in Europe. And therefore, when somebody goes in and publishes something meant to provoke Muslims, while it's wrong of the Muslims to allow themselves to be manipulated by taking the bait, I don't think you can give a pass to those people who did the provocation either. And I think that it is interesting that most newspapers in the United States didn't publish the Danish cartoons, even though it's absolutely legal to do so here. Why is that? Because they value freedom of speech, but they also value good manners.
And responsibility. I take your point entirely, and I have to say, I mean, without getting too far down in the weeds of the latest diplomacy that I spoke about, that Europe has not been a totally enthusiastic partner of our initiatives with the OIC in defining freedom of expression in relation to defamatory speech against religion.
I could say just something on that. I mean, I'm not a lawyer, but I do remember the phrase about yelling fire in a crowded theater. I mean, there is a sense of individual responsibility on the part of the media and to publish cartoons like that, which they know are likely to lead to violence and death, is not to me not very responsible. But I also have to say, having lived in the Arab world a long time, I've seen in countries where any cartoon that was in any way critical of the regime in power would get you very unpleasant attention from the security forces, that I've seen the vilest kinds of cartoons against both of the other two revealed religions, something that certainly would make you ashamed. So there are lots of different points of view, but I think one is entitled to a certain amount of respect and tolerance, and cartoons like that don't show much tolerance. Now, you wanted me to talk about the media in what respect? You mean it?
That's exactly what I
Okay. Good. Okay.
Good morning. Thanks to all of you. I know, we, at least myself, migrate to look for democracy. But I don't know how can we be successful. We talked earlier, when my first question was about invading Iraq, and we get a lot of violence now. Now, how far are we from doing that to other non-democratic Middle Eastern countries? Because as you could notice in the last few months, the violence in Pakistan have tremendously increased, probably 700 times like during Musharraf. But during Musharraf control, our media, our Congress, we were all hitting the drums that there is no democracy in Pakistan. Now we see the violence coming in Pakistan and Pakistan. What can we do to prevent in the future our fingers to play in different countries, even though they're not non-democratic countries? Thank you.
Should I, since I've dealt with Iraq, I suppose that might be a problem. In terms of ourselves getting involved in another war in the Middle East, I think given the unhappy experience of Iraq especially, and the still very unclear and cloudy outcome in Afghanistan, I think extremely unlikely. We may sometimes be unwise, but we're not crazy. I mean, everyone, I think, almost everyone accepts that the invasion of Iraq was a war of choice, not of necessity. The president himself has said it. I might comment too, I was giving a talk in Iraq a couple of weeks ago, and one of the people said he had heard Jim Baker asked, was it worth it? And Jim Baker, the war in Iraq, and Jim Baker said, absolutely. I don't understand how anyone could make that kind of comment. I mean, first of all, I think we need to remember that Iraq is far from settled. I gave a talk shortly, and I called it just a few days ago, and I said, Iraq forgotten but not gone. It's still around. There's a lot still to be written, and some of it may be very unpleasant, although there's more reason to hope. You might be able in the future, if Iraq does turn out to be reasonably democratic with more human rights, be able to say, well, in the end, yeah, it's kind of worth it. But I think you also have to remember the incredible amount of unnecessary suffering that we caused in this war by the blunders that we made, some of which were entirely willful, because we didn't want to know anything which didn't agree with what we had already decided to do. I think we will be very careful in the future. Also, for practical reasons, our military are completely overstretched. We're in no position to take on another war in terms of our military. We're also in no financial position to take on anything as expensive. Joseph Stiglitz, fairly early in the war, counting everything he thought would be, in the end, would be involved in Iraq, estimated the cost of the war in Iraq at $3 trillion. Even if trillions have replaced billions as the unit of currency these days, that's still a lot of money. So I think, and that is my personal feeling on promoting democracy. If you're going to really press governments hard to promote democracy, you better be prepared to back up your pressure. And we were not able or willing in the previous administration to back up the pressure. Far better to have a more modest approach, try to encourage and help and assist the forces for democracy in these regions. And because I think if democracy is to come to some of these countries in the Arab world, it essentially has to come from the people themselves through changes in education, the change in the media, with the internet and with a freer media, and with the sclerotic condition of the so-called revolutionary republics in the area. If you're going to get into this, don't get into it at a level that you cannot sustain and expose people that you have encouraged then to retribution that you cannot prevent.
Thank you.
I'd like to say something about Pakistan because the situation there, first off, Pakistan is a democracy. It's a very badly flawed democracy in which the military comes in and takes over anytime it wants. But it's a kind of democracy, and all democracies, even ours, has its flaws, although ours are much more minor by comparison. The point is that fixing those flaws is not our problem, it's their problem. And when we look, as the Obama administration right now is evaluating our strategy there, the first thing you've got to look at when you want to evaluate your strategy is what are your objectives. In my opinion, the only legitimate objective we could have for being in that part of the world right now is to prevent it from becoming a haven for terrorists who are going to launch attacks against the United States and our interests. If we can get that clear in our own heads, then we can define a strategy that will allow us to succeed in that without destabilizing this, flawed democracy as we have been doing. And I think that's the first step. And I'll plug our blog. The Minaret of Freedom Institute website is minaret.org, and if you go to blog.minaret.org, you'll find an article I wrote on this question.
Thank you, and thank you all for your very excellent presentations. And thank you all for participating in this conference today, and we hope we'll join the afternoon panel.